John lived in a small town with his parents and brother. Mike was in ninth grade, and John was in eighth. John loved collecting antiques, but they were always expensive. He could never save enough money. Still, he visited antique shops often. Most times, he returned disappointed. Mike didn't like this.
Why do you keep going there?
He said.
You can't buy anything. When you grow up and get a job, maybe you can. But trust me, once you are married, you will have bills to pay. You won't think about these things.
John didn't listen. He still went. His parents knew he would understand with time. One evening, John went to an antique shop. He saw an old mirror with a golden frame.
Sir, how much is this?
He asked.
Just $50.
The shopkeeper said. John smiled, paid for it, and went home. He hung it on his room wall. After dinner, John packed his school bag and lay in bed. Suddenly, a voice said,
I like your outfit and your smile. But I don't like your hairstyle.
John froze.
Who are you?
He asked, his voice shaking. He jumped up and looked around. Then, his eyes landed on the mirror. His reflection winked. John froze.
It's me.
No, dear.
The reflection said.
I'm a soul trapped in this mirror.
John yelped and dived under his blanket, shaking.
Please talk to me. I'm bored.
The mirror said. John whispered.
Oh no.
You look handsome. I just want to give you fashion tips.
John stayed silent. Somehow, he barely fell asleep. The next morning, John woke up feeling exhausted. His eyes were red, and his head felt heavy. He got ready for school and walked into the kitchen. He sat down and started eating in silence. Just then, Danielle and Mike came and started breakfast. They were chatting about weekend plans. Danielle glanced at him.
John, are you okay? You look tired.
Laura nodded.
You haven't spoken at all.
Mike smirked.
Did a ghost scare you last night?
John put his cup down hard and burst out.
Why is everyone after me? Can't I eat in peace?
He pushed his chair back, grabbed his bag, and rushed out. Danielle was surprised.
What's wrong with him?
Mike shrugged.
He bought an old mirror. Now he is acting like an old man.
Laura sipped her tea quietly. As the first period started, John leaned toward Louis and whispered,
I have to tell you something.
Louis raised an eyebrow.
What is it?
John hesitated, then whispered.
There is a ghost in my room.
Louis's eyes widened in shock.
Are you serious?
Before John could reply, the teacher entered the classroom. He sighed and stayed quiet. All the time, Louis kept glancing at John, noticing his red eyes. He was dying to know more. But they couldn't talk until break time. As soon as the bell rang, they ran outside and sat on a bench.
Now, tell me everything.
Louis said. John took a deep breath.
I bought an old mirror from an antique shop. Last night, it spoke to me. I was terrified and couldn't sleep. I'm returning it this evening.
Louis smiled.
No way. I will stay with you on Saturday night. We need to see what happens.
John frowned.
But what about tonight?
Louis thought for a moment.
Sleep in Mike's room.
John sighed.
Okay.
That night, John stepped into Mike's room.
Mike, can I sleep here?
He asked hesitantly. Mike smirked.
Are you scared?
John hesitated.
Not at all. I'm going back to my room.
As he turned to leave, Mike called.
John! Wait.
But John didn't stop. He returned back and wrapped himself in his blanket. Suddenly, a voice said,
I know you are awake.
John froze.
Please, come closer.
The mirror said. John's heart pounded.
Oh no!
Danielle and Laura were startled by his shout and rushed to his room. Mike ran out of his room too. The door clicked as they entered. John shut his eyes tightly. Laura placed a hand on his shoulder.
Dear. What happened? Are you scared?
John sat up, trying to stay calm.
No, Mom. Why are you here?
Danielle frowned.
We heard you scream.
John forced a yawn.
Maybe a bad dream. I was sleeping.
Mike crossed his arms.
John, can I stay here?
John shook his head.
No, Mike. It's fine.
They all left. John shut his eyes tightly, covered his ears, and barely slept. The next evening, Louis arrived for the night stay. John told Laura, who just smiled. After dinner, they went to John's room. Sitting on the bed, they started chatting. Louis glanced at the mirror, but pretended not to notice. Suddenly, the mirror spoke.
Who is with you? John?
Louis's eyes widened, and he jumped under the blanket. John quickly hid too. The mirror continued.
Your friend?
Louis was trembling. John whispered.
Look in the mirror.
No way.
Louis shook his head. They stayed up all night. The next morning, after breakfast, Louis grabbed his bag.
John. Return it today.
John nodded. Louis rushed home. That evening, John took the mirror back to the antique shop.
Sir, please take it back.
The shopkeeper said.
Sorry. We don't accept returns.
John said.
I don't want a refund.
The shopkeeper nodded and took it back. As John walked home, he smiled.
No more antiques now.